Imagine a country where the economy basically triples in size in just a couple of decades,
Right.
where high-speed internet just suddenly blankets these remote mountain valleys, and where a historically agrarian population leaps straight into the digital age.
It's a massive leap.
It really is. I mean, in almost any other place on Earth, that story ends with clear-cut forests, choking smog, and, a massive wealth gap.
Yeah, that's the usual blueprint for rapid development.
Exactly. But today, we're looking at 50 years of hard data from a nation that decided standard economic progress, it's essentially a flawed religion.
A completely different paradigm.
Yeah. And they legally mandated that 60% of its land must remain untouched forests forever.
Which is arguably one of the most fascinating socioeconomic experiments of the modern era.
Absolutely.
We are looking at a society that has actively chosen to handicap its own raw industrial output, just to preserve its ecological and cultural soul.
Right, while still somehow managing to lift its population out of extreme poverty. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack a comprehensive, multidimensional research report on the national development of Bhutan.
And we're spanning a huge time frame here.
Yeah, from 1960 all the way to 2023. And to be clear with you listening, this isn't based on, a few romanticized travel blogs or philosophical essays.
No, not at all.
We are looking at half a century of rigorous World Bank data. It's this massive data set tracking everything from infant mortality and gender parity to greenhouse gas emissions and national debt.
And, just looking at the physical presentation of this report sets the stage perfectly.
The cover.
Yeah, because if you pick up a typical national development report, the cover is usually plastered with these glossy photos of gleaming skyscrapers.
Or bustling stock exchanges.
Right, or massive container ships. It's all about the visual noise of commerce. But this report, it is strikingly minimalist.
It really is. It's just a stark white background, crisp dark text, and right in the center there's this simple two-dimensional icon symbolizing balanced development.
It's entirely academic and honestly almost quietly defiant.
I love that description. Quietly defiant.
It's basically telling you before you even open to page 1, we are not just about the money.
Yeah.
We measure success differently here.
Which is incredibly disruptive to how we normally analyze global success.
Oh, completely.
Because for the last 70 years, the global community has been conditioned to worship at the altar of gross domestic product.
The almighty GDP.
Right. If your GDP is up, you're winning. If it's down, you're losing. It is a binary, overly simplistic worldview.
And Bhutan has basically spent the last 60 years asking and trying to mathematically prove what if that single metric is fundamentally the wrong way to run a civilization.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the central tension of this entire deep dive, the question that's going to hover over every single chart, graph, and spreadsheet we explored today is this.
Right.
How exactly does a remote, landlocked Himalayan kingdom modernize?
It's the big question.
Right, how do they build out roads, state-of-the-art hospitals, and a 5G digital infrastructure without completely losing their cultural identity or chopping down their ancient forests to pay for it?
It's the ultimate tightrope walk of the 21st century.
Totally.
And to understand how they're attempting this, we have to start with the raw economic engine.
We have to look at the money.
Exactly, because as much as we talk about balance and ecology, you cannot build a modern, sustainable utopia for free.
Right. Healthcare and education cost money.
They cost a lot of money.
Right.
So we have to look at how they actually generated the wealth to fund this societal transition.
Right. Let's look at the gross domestic product and gross national income, the traditional metrics.
The baseline numbers?
Yeah. Because even though Bhutan's philosophy is different, their traditional numbers are absolutely staggering.
They really are.
When you measure their GDP in constant local currency units, which for you listening just means adjusting for inflation so we get a true picture of growth, it has climbed with incredible resilience.
Almost relentlessly.
Yeah. Recently, it hit approximately 33.36 billion local currency units.
That's a massive scale up.
And looking at the per capita gross national income, it reached roughly $142,015 in 2021.
To contextualize those numbers for you, That is not a gentle, meandering upward slope of a country slowly figuring things out.
No, definitely not.
That is a trajectory of profound wealth generation. It's an economic transformation that usually takes centuries, compressed into just a few decades.
It's speedrun economics.
Exactly. But the truly critical part of this data is the timeline.
Right.
When you look at the trend line on the graph for GDP, it's relatively steady for a long time, and then there is a distinct, massive acceleration.
Like a rocket taking off.
Yes. A nearly vertical, steep upward arrow right between the years 2010 and 2015.
I'm looking at that exact chart right now, and it's wild.
It's striking, isn't it?
It really is. It's like they were driving a reliable old tractor for 30 years, just puttering along, making very steady, respectable progress.
Right.
And then suddenly, between 2010 and 2015, they pulled over, ripped the tractor engine out, and swapped in a sports car's V8 engine.
That's exactly what it looks like.
Boom, vertical climb. How does a country just double its speed practically overnight?
Well, that vertical climb is the payoff of decades of grueling, highly strategic infrastructure investment finally coming online.
Okay.
What you're seeing in that specific 2010 to 2015 window is the structural resilience of the Bhutanese economy flexing its muscles.
But mechanically, what actually happened then?
This was a period when massive state-backed hydroelectric power projects finally started turning their turbines.
Ah, so it's the water.
Exactly.
But
Building a hydroelectric dam in the Himalayas is not a quick project.
I can't even imagine the logistics.
It takes years, sometimes decades of surveying, pouring concrete, and complex engineering.
Sure.
We're spending massive amounts of capital for a long time with no immediate return.
Just sinking money into the mountains.
Yes. But once those dams were finished and the turbines started spinning, they began generating colossal amounts of electricity.
Way more than they need, right?
Much more than a small population could ever use. So they export it to their incredibly energy-hungry neighbor, India.
Wow.
That sale of electricity literally supercharged their GDP overnight.
They basically built an economic geyser in the mountains, capped it while they laid all the pipe work, and then just opened the valve right around 2010.
That's a great way to put it.
But, I want to pause and think about what that means for the actual human beings living there.
It changes everything.
It has to. What does a leapfrog jump in per capita income mean for a single generation?
It's disorienting.
You have people who grew up in households operating on a literal barter system, trading crops and livestock, and by the time they're middle-aged, their national per capita wealth has multiplied exponentially.
And they're dealing in global currency.
Exactly.
That level of rapid economic expansion creates an immense sociological shock to the system.
Right.
When wealth multiplies that quickly, the social fabric has to stretch dramatically to accommodate it.
How so? Like, what does that look like on the ground?
Well, you see rapid urbanization as people leave the farms for the capital city.
Makes sense.
You see the sudden availability of imported consumer goods. Diets change radically.
From local grains to imported snacks.
Yes, and transportation shifts from walking or using pack animals to buying imported cars and motorcycles. It is a absolute whiplash of modernization.
It has to be disorienting. I mean, you go from walking half a day just to reach the next village to scrolling on a smartphone in the span of a few years.
It's an entire paradigm shift.
But as impressive as that vertical GDP climb is, I actually have a problem with it.
Oh.
Yeah, because raw GDP only tells us how fast the sports car is going down the highway.
That's fair.
It doesn't tell us how much gas is left in the tank. It doesn't tell us if the engine is overheating or if the wheels are about to fall off.
And that skepticism is exactly why standard macroeconomic analysis is often blind to impending crises.
Right, because a booming GDP can hide a dying country.
Completely. But this is where Bhutan's data introduces a much more revealing metric.
Okay.
Something that fundamentally separates their accounting from almost anywhere else on Earth.
Such as?
The report introduces a concept called adjusted net national income, or adjusted NNI.
The numbers for adjusted NNI are also highly impressive, right?
Very much so.
We're tracking growth from $347 million back in 2005 to $1.06 billion in 2021.
And that's measured in constant 2015 US dollars to keep the inflation math clean.
So their wealth essentially tripled.
Exactly.
But for you listening, we really need to break down what adjusted NNI actually is.
It's crucial.
And why it might be a vastly superior way to measure a country's success than the regular GDP numbers we hear on the evening news.
What's fascinating here is the philosophical difference in the math.
Okay, lay it on me.
Standard GDP is frankly a bit dumb.
A bit dumb. I like that.
It is a blunt instrument. If a country clear-cuts an entire ancient irreplaceable forest and sells the timber on the global market, its GDP shoots up.
Because they made a sale.
Right. On paper, it looks like they had a fantastic year of economic growth.
But in reality, they've permanently destroyed a core asset to get a one-time cash payout.
Exactly. Adjusted NNI corrects for that illusion.
How does the math work?
It takes a nation's total income and then subtracts the depreciation of its fixed capital, like factories wearing down or roads degrading.
Okay, that makes sense.
And crucially, it subtracts the depletion of its natural resources.
So to use an analogy, standard GDP is like counting the money you made by selling off all your living room furniture and calling it income.
Yes.
You look rich for a week, but now you're sitting on the floor.
That is a perfect analogy.
Adjusted NNI is asking, wait, where are we going to sit tomorrow? It accounts for the loss of the furniture.
Precisely. If we look at the report, there is a vivid stacked area chart that illustrates this perfectly.
I see it here.
It plots the standard GDP as the top line, and the adjusted NNI as the line just below it.
And there's a gap between them.
Right. The gap between those two lines is circled in red, and it's explicitly labeled fixed capital consumption and resource depletion.
And I imagine in a lot of rapidly developing nations, that gap is probably an absolute chasm, right?
Huge.
Because they are strip mining their environments to fund their short-term growth.
Exactly. In many countries, the GDP line goes straight up, but the adjusted NNI line stays flat or even drops.
Because they are burning their house down to stay warm.
That's exactly what's happening. But in Bhutan's data, the adjusted NNI is growing right alongside the GDP.
The lines move together.
Yes, they move together. This means their wealth creation is structurally sustainable.
Wow.
They aren't liquidating their ecology to inflate their ledgers.
Imagine how profoundly different the world would look today if every single country measured their political and economic success by adjusted NNI rather than standard GDP.
It would rewrite global politics.
We wouldn't be cheering for economic policies that permanently bankrupt our ecosystems.
Right.
It would fundamentally change the definition of what a good year for a country actually means.
It forces long-term thinking at a systemic level.
Yeah.
If depleting your forests or mining out all your coal actually penalizes your national scorecard, politicians act differently.
They have to.
It's a profound shift in accounting that fundamentally changes human behavior.
But to understand how Bhutan generated this sustainable wealth, we have to look under the hood of the economy.
We have to look at the sectors.
Right. What exactly the people are doing for work today compared to 50 years ago? Because you don't triple your national income just by farming the same potatoes more efficiently.
No, you definitely do not.
Right.
If we examine the percentage bar charts in the data, breaking down the evolution of agriculture, industry, and services, the story of their modernization is written right there in the shifting blocks of color over time.
I love charts like that.
Over the decades, the block representing agriculture shrinks significantly.
And the other two.
The blocks for industry and services expand dramatically.
And the service sector is the real star of the show here, right?
Absolutely.
The data highlights that the service sector has repeatedly broken the 10% annual growth mark.
Which is incredible.
10% growth in a single year is an explosive rate of expansion for things like hotels, high-end tourism, banking, IT, and retail.
It is a phenomenal growth rate. But what is critical to understand is the mechanism of this shift.
How actually happened?
Right. How do you actually get from point A, a traditional agrarian economy where almost everyone works in the fields, to point C, a modern service-oriented economy?
Usually there's a middle step.
Historically, that transition requires a bridge. For Bhutan, that bridge was industry.
But not just any industry.
No, a very specific, carefully chosen kind of industry. It was those massive investments in hydropower infrastructure we discussed earlier.
Right, the economic geyser.
Exactly. Building a hydroelectric dam is a colossal industrial undertaking.
It takes so much raw material.
It requires thousands of tons of concrete, imported steel, advanced engineering, heavy machinery, and thousands upon thousands of workers.
Okay, so the hydropower sector provided the massive capital injection.
And the physical power grid.
Right.
Because once you have a reliable, massive power grid and you're selling the excess power to India for hard currency, The government can now fund the airports.
The telecommunications networks.
Yes, and the paved roads that allow a high-end service sector like luxury tourism and digital banking to actually function.
Because you can't have a luxury eco-resort without reliable electricity.
Exactly.
Let's paint a picture of this, because the visual contrast is stunning.
It really is.
You have these brutalist, massive concrete hydroelectric dams, which are absolute feats of modern engineering.
Massive structures.
And they're nestled perfectly into these pristine, ancient Himalayan valleys. It is literally heavy industry powering the invisible service sector.
It's quite the juxtaposition.
So what does this all mean? I want to push back on this, or rather what I find confusing.
Yeah.
When I look at the history of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, or the recent massive development in Southeast Asia, the bridge from farming to services is almost always sweatshop manufacturing.
Cheap labor.
Right. It's textiles, it's cheap plastic goods, it's massive smog-filled factories churning out exports.
The classic middle phase.
Did Bhutan just completely skip the sweatshop phase of developing nation status?
That is exactly what they did.
That's wild.
And it is incredibly rare in the history of global economics. But, it wasn't just a moral choice. It was a geographical necessity.
Because of the mountains.
Because of their terrain.
Mm-hmm.
Being entirely landlocked in the highest mountain range in the world, exporting cheap manufactured goods was never going to be logistically competitive.
The shipping costs would be insane.
Right. They couldn't build cheap widgets and put them on a cargo ship to Europe or America. They have no ocean.
True.
So they leveraged the one competitive advantage their extreme geography gave them: gravity and water.
Falling water generates electricity.
Precisely. By skipping low-tier, labor-intensive manufacturing and going straight to energy export and high-end, low-volume services, they entirely avoided the massive urban slums.
And the horrific air pollution.
Yes, and the exploitative labor phases that typically plague developing nations.
But think about the psychological and cultural implications of that leap.
It's massive.
You are moving an entire population, literally taking a generation whose parents were out in the fields dealing with yaks and monsoon seasons.
A completely agrarian lifestyle.
And you're putting them into air-conditioned offices, making them bilingual tourism guides, or having them manage the digital grid of an international energy sector.
It's two different worlds.
The mental shift required to go from following the natural seasons to following a 9-to-5 corporate quarterly schedule in a single generation is almost incomprehensible.
It is a profound psychological pivot.
Yeah.
And you cannot execute that kind of pivot without completely overhauling the capabilities of your population.
You need a different skill set entirely.
Exactly. You can't transition an entire workforce into a modern service and knowledge economy without a massive systemic upgrade to the human brain trust.
And this brings us to the next section of the report.
Right, which is exactly why the Bhutanese government poured resources into what the data calls the Human Capital Foundation.
Because you can't run a hydroelectric plant or a modern banking sector with people who only know how to count harvest yields.
No, you need advanced math, engineering, and digital literacy.
Which brings us to the education revolution.
The data on education in this World Bank report is, frankly, a logistical triumph.
Let's get into the numbers.
We are tracking the gross enrollment rates across primary, secondary, and tertiary, which means university-level education.
The primary enrollment numbers jump right off the page.
They do.
It has stayed above 100% for a long time, recently hitting 114%.
Which is an incredible milestone.
It proves the absolute success of their push for universal compulsory education. But on the other end of the spectrum, tertiary education, the university level, was essentially flatlining near zero back in 1999.
There were virtually no universities to speak of.
And then recently, it's skyrocketed to 15.1% of the population.
We really need to contextualize what a massive physical and administrative undertaking this represents.
Oh, for sure.
When we say they achieved over 100% primary enrollment, remember the geography we are talking about.
It's not a flat prairie.
Right. Bhutan is not a place where you can just build a large brick schoolhouse in the middle of a town and everyone walks there.
No.
This is highly mountainous, incredibly rugged, sparsely populated rural terrain. Villages are separated by deep ravines, winding mountain passes, and dense forests.
So getting a school to every village is a nightmare.
To physically ensure that every single child in that hostile geography has a trained teacher, a safe classroom, and daily educational materials is a Herculean feat of public administration.
Okay, wait, I have to ask a practical question that anyone looking closely at this data would have.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm looking at the chart, and the primary enrollment is 114%.
Yes.
The maximum amount of children in a society is 100%. How do you mathematically exceed 100%?
It sounds impossible.
Are kids taking the third grade twice because they really like it, or are older generations suddenly deciding to go back to school?
It's a great question, and it comes down to a crucial distinction in demographic beta.
Okay,
The difference between net enrollment and gross enrollment.
I'm listening.
Net enrollment only counts the children who are the exact official age for primary school.
Right.
Gross enrollment, however, counts absolutely everyone sitting in a primary school classroom, regardless of their age.
Ah, I see.
So when you see a number like 114%, it tells a very specific, very poignant story about a country catching up.
What's the story?
It means the government has successfully gotten the entire population of normal-aged kids into school, but they have also absorbed a massive influx of older children, or even young adults, who missed out on school previously.
And they are now finally entering the system to learn to read and write.
Exactly. It is the statistical signature of a country aggressively, rapidly correcting its past educational deficits.
That makes perfect sense. You finally build the school in the remote village, and suddenly the 8-year-olds and the 14-year-olds are all sitting together learning the alphabet.
Exactly.
And if we look at that visual of the multi-line graph for higher education, the university line is just flat for decades, a total flat line. And then right at the turn of the millennium, it just hockey sticks upwards.
It's a vertical climb.
But here's the friction point I'm curious about.
What's that?
How does a society absorb a sudden influx of thousands of university-educated youth?
It's a huge challenge.
Just one generation ago, higher education was almost non-existent. Now you have thousands of bright young people with degrees in engineering, business, and IT looking around a country that is still largely rural and asking, where is my desk? Where is my high-paying corporate job?
You've hit on one of the most difficult challenges of rapid development.
Yeah.
You are essentially creating the supply of human capital before the demand in the labor market fully exists.
And that causes problems.
This invariably causes growing pains, youth unemployment, and social frustration.
Right.
The economy can't always create white-collar jobs as fast as the universities mint graduates.
So they're overeducated for the current market.
Temporarily, yes.
Yeah.
But from a long-term strategic perspective, it's a necessary friction.
How so?
It's the prerequisite for building a knowledge economy. You simply cannot build an IT sector or a modern financial hub until you have the surplus of graduates to staff it.
You have to build a workforce first.
Exactly.
But the most staggering part of this education data isn't just how many people are going to school.
No, it's not.
It's not the sheer volume that's most interesting. It's who is going to school.
This is my favorite part of the report.
And this leads us to what is easily the most disruptive demographic shift in the entire 60-year analysis: the gender revolution.
I would argue this might be the most quietly radical data point we're discussing today.
Lay it out for us.
We are examining a metric called the Gender Parity Index, or GPI. Just to clarify, a GPI of 1.0 means perfect mathematical equality, exactly one girl enrolled for every one boy.
Right, and if we look at the base level, the primary education GPI has stabilized right around 1.0.
Perfect parity.
Equal numbers of little girls and little boys learning to read.
Yes.
But the tertiary education, the university level, is where this data truly shocks you.
The shift is unbelievable.
Back in 1999, the university GPI was an abysmal 0.31. Meaning for every 10 young men in college, there were barely 3 young women.
It was heavily skewed toward men.
But recently, that number jumped to 1.10.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a profound societal earthquake.
It really is.
A GPI of 1.10m doesn't just mean equality has been achieved.
No, it means they blew past it.
It means women are now actively outperforming and out-enrolling men in higher education.
Wow.
In a region of the world where patriarchal structures and traditional gender roles have dominated for centuries, the educational paradigm has been entirely inverted in the span of roughly 20 years.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They didn't just catch up. The women completely flipped the script in a single generation.
It's a total inversion.
But what happens to the social dynamics in a traditional society when the women are suddenly vastly more educated than the men?
It changes everything from marriages to the workforce.
You look at the radar chart visual in the report,
Yeah.
and the shake of gender equality used to be this shriveled, asymmetrical shape, heavily skewed toward men.
Right.
And now it is ballooned outward to perfectly encompass the male baselines and then physically pushes past them.
It creates a fascinating friction in the social fabric, and you have to extrapolate what this means for the future of the country. You have to ask, what does the future of Bhutanese leadership look like in 10, 15, or 20 years?
Because right now, the older generation of men still holds the majority of senior government ministries.
And corporate board seats.
Right.
But there is a massive wave, a demographic tsunami of highly educated, capable women currently in their 20s and 30s moving up the ranks.
Just waiting to take over.
Exactly. When this female-dominated university cohort enters their peak earning and leadership years, the entire power structure of the country is going to evolve.
It's going to change everything. It changes how national policies are written, how businesses prioritize their goals, how healthcare is managed.
Everything shifts.
And this level of female education naturally changes something else, something very intimate and fundamental to a nation's future.
The family unit.
It changes how families plan their lives, which takes us directly into the demographic transitions surrounding health, life, and death.
The correlation we see in this data is one of the most ironclad laws of sociology and public health.
Let's hear it.
In the report, we see a stark, undeniable negative correlation between life expectancy at birth and under-5 mortality.
Basically, people live longer when babies stop dying.
Right. As the government poured money into public health systems and rural clinics, under-5 mortality plummeted. Babies are finally surviving.
And as a direct result of babies surviving, the total fertility rate, the TFR, which is the average number of children a woman has over her lifetime, completely crashed.
The drop is stunning.
I want you to picture this. In 1960, the average Bhutanese woman had 6.7 children.
Almost 7 kids.
Today, it is just 1.46.
We really have to explain the mechanism of this demographic dividend.
Yeah, please do.
Because it's not a coincidence, it's direct causality.
Right.
When a society has high child mortality, families have many children because they know, tragically, that several of them will likely succumb to disease or malnutrition before they reach adulthood.
It's an awful survival strategy.
It is. But when increased health spending, universal vaccines, and robust public clinics guarantee that your children will live, that psychological need for large families evaporates almost immediately.
You don't need backup children, to put it bluntly.
Exactly. Combine that immense psychological relief with the fact that women are now highly educated, meaning they're spending their early 20s in universities and launching careers rather than starting families at 18.
And family sizes shrink dramatically.
It happens in every modernizing society, but here it happened with incredible speed.
So, the narrative line is incredibly direct. The government uses hydropower money to build schools and clinics.
Right.
The women go to university, the healthcare system ensures their first or second baby survives, and suddenly the whole population pyramid of the country completely changes shape.
It's a completely new demographic landscape.
You contrast the image of a 1960s household, a small, rural, smoky home packed with 7 children, where the older siblings are practically raising the younger ones.
Against a modern household.
Right. Against a modern Bhutanese household in the capital city of Thimphu, with 1 or 2 children and a university-educated mother working as a data analyst.
It's 2 entirely different universes coexisting in the same country, separated by just a few decades.
It is a phenomenal leap, but a TFR of 1.46 introduces a new, very modern problem that they have never faced before.
The replacement rate issue.
Right. The replacement rate for a human population, the average number of kids needed just to keep the total population stable, is 2.1.
And at 1.46, Bhutan is well below the replacement rate.
So is Bhutan heading toward an aging population crisis?
The demographic time bomb.
Exactly. We see this currently playing out in Japan, South Korea, and parts of Europe, where there simply aren't enough young workers entering the economy to support the pension and healthcare needs of a massive elderly population.
Bhutan is getting richer, but they are also getting older very fast.
It's the curse of success. You completely solve the agonizing problems of infant mortality and lack of education, and your reward is a demographic time bomb 50 years later.
It's a difficult trade-off.
But a modernizing society doesn't just change how people live and how many kids they have. It completely changes how they die.
Which brings us to a fascinating shift in the disease spectrum.
Right.
If you want to see what societal modernization looks like under a microscope, you don't look at GDP, you look at the cause of death data.
And the report has a great visual for this.
The World Bank report includes this donut chart comparing the types of diseases that are killing people over the decades.
And the transformation is spectacular. Deaths from communicable or infectious diseases have spectacularly collapsed.
They fell off a cliff.
They went from causing 40.7% of all deaths down to just 1.2%.
That is a public health miracle.
They basically wiped out the diseases that kill you quickly via infection. But the expanding slice of the pie chart is non-communicable diseases, NCDs.
The chronic illnesses.
Right. Things like cancer, heart disease, respiratory issues, and diabetes. These are now the dominant threat for adults aged 30 to 70.
This phenomenon is known as the epidemiological transition, and it is the ultimate paradox of development.
The paradox of development. I like that.
Bhutan has spent decades successfully eradicating the diseases of extreme poverty, dysentery, tuberculosis, malaria, cholera, things you catch from contaminated water or mosquitoes.
Right.
But in becoming a modern, wealthier society, they have inherited the diseases of modern affluence and sedentary lifestyle.
It's an unintended consequence of progress. When you go from walking behind a yak all day at high altitudes and eating a sparse traditional diet of grains and vegetables,
Just sitting at a desk?
right, to sitting at a desk at an IT firm for 9 hours a day and eating processed foods, imported snacks, and refined sugar, your body reacts.
It's a huge shock to the system.
I like to think of it this way. It's like they successfully fortified the castle walls against the invading army of infections, only to realize the new threat is the rich, heavy food they're eating inside the banquet hall.
That is a perfect analogy. The threat is no longer coming from the outside environment, it's coming from within the lifestyle.
And think about how the entire healthcare system must pivot to address this.
It requires a total redesign.
Building rural clinics to deliver vaccines and basic antibiotics is relatively straightforward and inexpensive. It's a logistical challenge to get the medicine up the mountain, but medically, it's simple.
You give the shot, the person is immune.
Exactly. But funding lifelong diabetes management, building specialized oncology wards to treat complex cancers.
Sourcing and running dialysis machines for failing kidneys.
Right. That requires a fundamentally different, infinitely more expensive, and highly specialized healthcare infrastructure.
It's a completely different kind of medical war. You go from fighting acute, short-term battles with vaccines to fighting chronic, lifelong sieges against the body that drain the national healthcare budget year after year.
It's daunting.
It really is.
But this tension between modernization and preservation, this push and pull of progress, isn't just happening inside the human body.
No, it's not.
It is happening to the actual earth they walk on, which leads us to one of the most famous, almost mythological aspects of this country, their ecological paradigm.
Yes, Bhutan is globally renowned as the carbon-negative champion.
It is central to their national identity.
And the data completely backs up the reputation. The report details Bhutan's forest cover, which is permanently stabilized above 71%.
That's incredible.
That translates to approximately 27,310 square kilometers of uninterrupted, protected forest.
Over 70% of the entire country is just trees. And for you listening, we aren't talking about little manicured city parks or commercial tree farms.
No, not at all.
We are talking about ancient, deep-rooted, incredibly diverse Himalayan forests. And the report notes the economic value of these forest rents as a percentage of GDP.
Right.
But what makes them special isn't just that they have trees. Canada has trees. Russia has trees.
It's what they do with them.
Or rather, what they legally refuse to do with them.
Exactly. Bhutan is one of the only carbon-negative countries on Earth.
Meaning their vast forests physically absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than the entire nation emits.
But we must be absolutely clear about why this is happening.
Yeah, let's clarify that.
This isn't an accident of underdevelopment. It isn't because they are too poor to buy chainsaws or build logging roads.
Right.
It is a deeply embedded, legally binding national strategy.
Yeah.
Their actual constitution mandates that at least 60% of the country must remain forested for all time.
It's in the Constitution.
They have made a conscious, highly calculated choice to prioritize long-term ecological assets over the short-term profits of the global timber trade.
I want to focus on the sheer restraint required for that. Because it's easy to be environmental when it doesn't cost you anything.
Oh, absolutely.
But imagine sitting on tens of thousands of square kilometers of highly valuable, harvestable timber.
A literal gold mine of wood.
You have international logging corporations waving massive checkbooks at your government, telling you exactly how much GDP you could generate, how many new hospitals and highways you could build with that timber money.
The temptation would be overwhelming.
And collectively, as a nation, looking at that cash and deciding, nope, we're going to leave it right where it is. The trees stay.
It requires an ironclad political will. But, if we look at the trajectory of the global economy, it might also turn out to be the smartest long-term financial play of the century.
House.
As global carbon markets mature, and as massive international corporations and heavily polluting nations are legally forced to buy carbon offsets to meet international climate goals.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Bhutan's pristine carbon-absorbing forest could transition from a passive ecological asset to their most valuable financial asset.
They are essentially hoarding the most precious commodity of the 21st century. Clean air and carbon capture capacity.
It's brilliant.
You visualize the satellite map of Bhutan, and it's just this massive, impenetrable sea of unbroken green, legally locked away from the chainsaws.
It's a beautiful image.
But let's be real for a second. Maintaining that green paradise isn't free.
Nothing is free.
Every modernizing economy requires energy. If you want a 5G network, if you want hospitals with MRI machines, if you want a fleet of cars and trucks to move goods, that comes with an energetic cost.
And that brings us to the actual price of progress.
Because the truth is, despite the romanticism, Bhutan is not a fairy tale.
No, they are a physical operating economy.
Right.
And if we analyze the dual axis chart in the report, it shows total greenhouse gas emissions, which are currently at 2.72 million tons of CO2 equivalent, excluding land use and forestry offsets.
Okay.
And right alongside that, it tracks the percentage of GNI loss to energy depletion.
So they are burning fuel, they are using energy, they have cars, trucks, and industries that create emissions just like anyone else.
This raises an important question. How does a country that prides itself on being carbon negative actually manage the dirty, carbon-heavy business of running a modern state?
Yeah, how do they square that circle?
The answer lies in how they monitor their resource depletion through a highly rigorous framework called adjusted net savings.
Back to the strict accounting.
Exactly. They know emissions exist and they know energy is consumed, but it is meticulously tracked against the country's wealth generation. They treat their environment like a strict corporate ledger. Every single unit of pollution is calculated against the economic gain, ensuring the net result is always positive for the country.
So we really have to shatter the idealized, almost mystical view of Bhutan here.
We really do.
They aren't just a bunch of monks meditating in the woods, hoping the air stays clean through good vibes.
Definitely not.
They are actively, aggressively managing industrial emissions, like a ruthless carbon accountant balancing a tight ledger.
That's exactly what they are doing.
They know exactly how much CO2 a new factory will produce, and they ensure the forest has the mathematical capacity to absorb it before they approve the permit.
But the extrapolation here points to a looming, very real challenge.
What's that?
Can Bhutan remain carbon negative as its population fully adopts digital, energy-hungry, modern lifestyles?
Because right now they're absorbing it, but energy use is only going up.
Exactly. It's one thing to offset the emissions of a largely rural population, but when every single citizen has a smartphone, when homes are filled with modern appliances, when the transportation grid relies on massive amounts of power for EVs or imported fuel,
The power grid is going to be strained.
the heavy, invisible hum of server farms and mobile networks is directly competing with the silence of the pristine forest.
It's the ultimate contrast of the ancient and the modern. You have this untouched alpine tree line, and right next to it, the heavy hum of an expanding 5G network relay tower.
It's a delicate balance.
But to execute a balancing act, this delicate managing carbon down to the individual ton, educating every single child across a mountain range, building billion-dollar hydropower dams without bankrupting the state. You need something very specific.
You need a government the people actually trust to handle the money.
And that is perhaps the rarest resource in the developing world.
It really is.
Which brings us to their governance and trust metrics. In the realm of international development, we call this the ultimate soft power.
And the metrics here are just phenomenal.
I had to read this twice to believe it. According to the World Bank governance data, Bhutan ranks at the 91st percentile globally for control of corruption.
The 91st percentile.
And they sit comfortably above the 70th percentile for the rule of law.
We cannot overstate how important this is to everything else we've discussed today.
Right.
This is the absolute secret sauce of the Bhutanese model. Look around the globe at other developing nations. You cannot execute a multi-decade infrastructure plan. You cannot transition from an agrarian society to a service economy if the foreign aid and tax funds are being skimmed by corrupt officials at every level of government.
It just doesn't work.
If the millions of dollars meant for the rural school system buys a cabinet minister a yacht in Europe, the entire system fails.
The money has to reach the people.
High institutional trust is their bedrock. Without it, the dams don't get built to standard, the schools don't get textbooks, and the forests get sold off in secret backroom deals.
But how does a developing, relatively poor country achieve the 91st percentile in anti-corruption? They are mathematically outranking major, wealthy Western nations.
It's an incredible achievement.
We're looking at this step chart showing Bhutan's governance rankings steadily climbing past established centuries-old democracies. How do they do it? Is it something cultural? Is it deeply rooted in their Buddhist heritage? Or is it structural?
It's a combination of both, but it is heavily influenced by their highly unique political history.
Okay, let's hear the history.
Bhutan didn't have a violent, bloody revolution to achieve democracy like so many other nations. They had a monarchy that voluntarily and proactively ceded absolute power to a democratic parliament.
Wait, the king just gave up power.
The king essentially forced democracy upon the country over the objections of many citizens who loved the monarchy and simultaneously established rigorous, fiercely independent anti-corruption commissions.
That's wild.
Because the mandate for extreme integrity came from the absolute top, from a king who was culturally revered, it set a baseline of zero tolerance for graft that quickly became institutionalized at every level of civil service.
It's incredible. You can have all the World Bank funding in the world, you can have all the natural resources, the water, the timber, but if your corruption score is terrible, that money just evaporates into thin air.
It leaks out of the system.
I like to think of it like plumbing. Bhutan actually built the pipes to hold the water. The money meant for the public good actually flows to the public trust without leaking out into offshore bank accounts.
And when a government isn't skimming off the top, that wealth actually reaches the bottom.
Which is the perfect segue to how they handle equity.
Because growing the economic pie is one thing. A high GDP is great. But how you slice that pie is what actually matters to the average person waking up and going to work every day.
Absolutely.
And the data here focuses heavily on defeating inequality. The headline metric is the spectacular drop in their Gini coefficient.
If you don't look at economic statistics every day, think of the Gini coefficient like this. It is a measure of inequality.
Right.
A score of 0 means perfect equality. Every single person in the country has the exact same amount of money.
Yeah.
A score of 100 means perfect inequality. One single person has literally all the wealth and everyone else has absolutely nothing.
Right, and Bhutan's Gini coefficient dropped from 40.9, which is relatively unequal, down to 28.5.
That's a massive drop.
And the report highlights these shared prosperity indicators showing robust consumption growth specifically for the bottom 40% of the population.
So the poorest people in the country are seeing their daily lives improve faster than anyone else.
Exactly. A Gini score of 28.5 places Bhutan in the ranks of the highly egalitarian, socially democratic nations of Northern Europe, places like Norway or Denmark.
Wow.
It means Bhutan hasn't just grown its GDP, it has actively, aggressively suppressed the wealth gap.
Which is hard to do during a boom.
In many fast-growing economies, we see inequality explode. The rich buy up the real estate and the assets, and they get exponentially richer, while the poor just get hit with inflation.
But Bhutan actively prevented this.
They ensured that as the macroeconomic tide rose, it lifted the floor for the poorest demographics, rather than just raising the ceiling for the elite.
Imagine a wealth distribution graph. Normally, in a booming economy, you see this graph stretch out into a long, thin tail on the right side, representing a few new billionaires pulling away from the pack.
The wealth gap.
But in Bhutan, that graph compresses together. The gap between the richest and the poorest is physically shrinking, even as the whole country gets wealthier.
It's a very different economic model.
If you're a citizen, if you're looking at an economy to invest your life and raise your family in, you don't just want a high average GDP, because you might not be the average. You might be at the bottom.
You want a low Gini coefficient.
You want the floor to be safe. You want to know that even if you aren't at the top, you won't fall into an abyss of poverty.
It's a testament to highly intentional policy design. They use the massive revenues from those hydropower dams we talked about to directly subsidize rural electrification.
To provide free universal health care.
And to fund that 114% primary school enrollment, that is mechanically how you compress a Gini coefficient. You take the corporate and state wealth and directly inject it into the social floor.
But maintaining this safe floor, building those schools on the sides of mountains, constructing those massive concrete dams, it all required a massive amount of upfront capital.
And they didn't have it initially.
It required a lot of outside help, which leads us to the final data we need to look at: their external lifelines and their digital future.
We have to acknowledge that Bhutan didn't bootstrap this entire economic miracle using only their own domestic savings.
No, they had help.
The data shows net official development assistance, or ODA, which is foreign aid, holding remarkably steady at above $150 million a year.
Okay.
Alongside that, we see rising external debt, largely taken on to fund those massive infrastructure projects.
So they are actively borrowing money, and they are taking international aid.
Concurrently, the report shows this explosive digital transition.
The internet penetration.
Exactly. Internet penetration jumped from literally zero a couple of decades ago to over 50% today. And the number of mobile phone users and secure internet servers is just skyrocketing. It's a vertical line on the infographic.
Let's synthesize these two realities. On one hand, you have reliance on foreign aid and external debt. On the other, you have a rapid digital revolution.
They're deeply connected.
Foreign aid and borrowed money funded the physical reality, the asphalt roads, the concrete dams, the physical fiber optic cables crossing the mountains.
And now that digital infrastructure, with over half the country online, is the foundation for the next phase of their economy.
They're moving from purely selling hydroelectricity to building a high-tech service and knowledge economy.
But whenever I hear the phrase rising external debt in a developing nation, alarm bells go off.
Oh, absolutely.
We've seen so many countries completely crushed by foreign debt, forced into harsh austerity measures. What is the risk profile of Bhutan's debt? Are they in danger of defaulting and losing their sovereignty?
That's a huge concern.
It comes back to the fundamental concept of good debt versus bad debt. If a country borrows billions of dollars from the World Bank to fund a bloated, corrupt military or to build empty vanity projects that generate no income, that is highly toxic bad debt.
Because it generates no revenue to pay itself back.
Exactly. Bhutan's external debt is almost entirely tied to productive revenue-generating assets.
The dams.
They borrow money, mostly from India, to build a hydroelectric dam. Once the dam is finished, they sell the electricity back to India, and the guaranteed revenue pays off the loan and then provides pure profit for the state for decades.
It's a highly leveraged position, but structurally it's good debt.
Exactly.
So they used foreign aid to build the physical roads and the dams, but they are using the internet to build their future. They took those external lifelines and wove them into a digital safety net.
It's an amazing transition.
You look at the infographic showing this sudden vertical spike in smartphone usage, and you realize that a yak herder in a remote valley now has access to the sum of human knowledge in their pocket.
And secure servers are popping up across the Himalayan landscape, connecting these remote ancient valleys directly to global finance, remote work, and international education.
Which fundamentally alters the isolation that protected their unique culture for so many centuries.
It does.
The towering mountains kept the physical world out, but the internet doesn't care about mountains. The digital world floods right in.
So pulling all these incredibly diverse threads together, the sheer GDP acceleration from the dams, the meticulous carbon accounting, the massive gender flip in the universities, the plummeting birth rates, the battle against diabetes, what is the ultimate conclusion of this 60-year deep dive?
The overarching theme, the grand narrative written into half a century of World Bank data, is that Bhutan is successfully, deliberately marching toward becoming a high-income gross national happiness state.
They are trying to mathematically prove that you can achieve high-income wealth without sacrificing your ecological and cultural soul.
Let's recap the four main pillars we've unpacked today. First, growth quality. They aren't just blindly chasing GDP. They are rigorously tracking adjusted net national income.
Ensuring their wealth is structurally sustainable and not just the result of liquidating their natural resources like selling off the living room furniture.
Second, the social foundations. The absolute revolution in universal education, particularly the gender flip where women are now dominating universities.
Paired with a healthcare system that eradicated infectious diseases and ensured babies survive, fundamentally changing the shape of their families.
Third is their governance advantage. Maintaining a 91st percentile ranking in controlling corruption is the invisible shield that protects their entire development model.
It is the plumbing that ensures the wealth goes to the people, shrinking the Gini coefficient and maintaining social equity.
And fourth, the future challenges. They have to manage the costly rise of modern non-communicable diseases. They have to carefully manage their leveraged external debt.
And they have to fight tooth and nail to maintain their carbon negative status while their population fully embraces a digital, energy-hungry lifestyle.
It is a phenomenal, almost impossibly delicate balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
For you listening, thank you for coming on this deep dive with us. Because looking at this data, honestly, it is an exercise in sheer data-backed optimism.
It really is.
We live in a world where it so often feels like economic progress is fundamentally at war with the environment, where modernization always has to mean losing your culture and breathing polluted air.
But this data proves that modern civilization and profound ecological preservation actually can coexist.
It requires immense discipline and a government that refuses to steal, but it is mathematically possible.
It is absolutely a reason for optimism, but as an analyst, I have to ground that optimism with a reminder of the relentless, ongoing effort required to maintain this trajectory. The pressures of globalization never stop. The external debt requires constant, vigilant management. The rising cost of treating diabetes and cancer will severely test their public health care budgets.
And the lure of quick cash from international timber conglomerates will always be there, whispering at the borders.
It is a daily, active choice to remain on this path.
And that leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We spent a lot of time talking about that demographic shift, the first generation of Bhutanese women who completely out-enrolled men in university.
It's going to change everything.
Very soon, over the next decade, these highly educated, modern women are going to take the reins of government ministries and corporate leadership.
Right.
Armed with widespread high-speed internet access, an ironclad constitutional mandate to remain carbon negative, and a drastically shrinking family size that changes the entire domestic dynamic. What happens next?
Will this new digitally native female-led generation figure out how to export the Bhutanese model to the rest of the world?
Or will the sheer, overwhelming pressure of globalized digital culture flooding in through every smartphone screen finally crack the Himalayan seal? You know, usually when we talk about diagnosing the health of a nation, there's this expectation of precision, of pointing to a single jagged line of GDP on a chart.
But Bhutan is showing us that diagnosing the future isn't about looking at one clean line.
It's about looking at the entire complex, muddy picture and realizing that sometimes the most beautiful, enduring results come from the most delicate balancing acts. Think about that. Until next time.